The flames engulfed the cabin with terrifying speed. Through the thick smoke, Ethan Calloway could barely see his hand in front of his face. His lungs burned with each desperate breath as he crawled across the wooden floor, searching for an exit that no longer existed. Outside, he heard the panicked shouts of the hunters who had started this nightmare before fleeing. "Help!" he called out, his voice reduced to a rasp. No one would hear him. No one would come. Then came the sound of splintering wood as something massive crashed through the burning door. Through watering eyes, Ethan glimpsed the enormous silhouette, 200 pounds of pure muscle and determination. Hunter had returned for him. "Go, boy!" Ethan choked out. But the creature ignored the command, pushing through flames that singed its dark fur. In that moment, Ethan finally accepted what his neighbors had been telling him for 3 years. This was no dog. The 200-pound black bear he had raised from a cub lowered its head and charged toward him. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Blackridge, Montana had never been kind to outsiders, and Ethan Calloway had no intention of becoming a local. The small mountain town of just over 800 souls was merely a place to disappear, which suited him just fine. At 42, the former Army Ranger had seen enough of humanity to last several lifetimes. Ethan's cabin sat on 20 acres of woodland, bordered by national forest on 2 sides and accessible only by a winding dirt road that became impassable after heavy snow. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles away, a blessing that had factored heavily into his purchase decision 3 years ago. The interior of the cabin was sparse but functional, a wood stove, a desk for his laptop where he did remote software consulting, a bookshelf lined with military history and wilderness survival guides, and walls conspicuously bare of photographs. The only decoration was his service medals, tucked away in a drawer where he wouldn't have to look at them every morning. Ethan woke before dawn, the remnants of nightmares clinging to him like cobwebs. The doctors at the VA had a clinical name for what plagued him: post-traumatic stress disorder. But no prescription could erase what he'd seen in Afghanistan. Nor could it bring back Sarah and little James, lost to a drunk driver while he was deployed on his 3rd tour. "You're isolating yourself," his sister Caroline would say during her monthly calls. "It's not healthy." Ethan would mutter non-committal responses until she gave up. What could he tell her? That crowds made his heart race, that he startled at car backfires, that sometimes, in the dark hours of morning, he couldn't remember why he bothered to keep breathing. The locals had learned to leave him alone. At the general store, they nodded politely but kept conversations brief. Sheriff Doug Winters, a Vietnam veteran himself, seemed to understand Ethan's need for solitude, checking in occasionally but never overstaying his welcome. Ethan had constructed his life carefully, like a fortress against pain. No attachments, no surprises, nothing to lose. Until that spring storm 3 years ago, the one that brought down the old oak at the edge of his property and, underneath its fallen branches, the tiny creature that would change everything. The spring storm had been relentless, battering Ethan's cabin for nearly 3 days. Rain hammered against the metal roof while wind howled through the surrounding pines like a freight train. When the massive oak at the edge of his property finally surrendered with a thunderous crack that even Ethan couldn't sleep through, He knew the morning would bring a mess to clean up. Dawn broke with unexpected clarity. The sky washed clean and brilliantly blue. Ethan pulled on his boots and work jacket, grabbed his chainsaw from the shed, and headed out to assess the damage. The fallen oak had taken down a section of his fence, its massive root system upturned like a giant's hand reaching from the earth. He was nearly finished cutting away the smaller branches when he heard it, a faint whimpering so soft he thought he'd imagined it. Ethan paused, letting the chainsaw idle, and listened. There it was again, coming from beneath a tangle of broken limbs near the trunk. "Hello?" he called, feeling foolish immediately afterward. Whatever was making that sound wasn't human. Setting down the chainsaw, Ethan carefully moved branches aside until he spotted movement. A tiny ball of brown fur, no bigger than his hand, shivering against the exposed roots of the fallen tree. 2 round ears and a pair of dark, frightened eyes peered up at him. "Well, damn," Ethan muttered. The creature looked like a puppy, though he couldn't identify the breed. Something with a stocky build and unusually large paws. Its brown fur was matted with mud, and it looked terrified. Ethan glanced around, looking for signs of a mother dog or perhaps other puppies, but found nothing. The little thing whimpered again, a sound so pitiful it pierced something in Ethan he thought had died years ago. "Where'd you come from, little guy?" he asked, reaching down slowly. The pup backed away, trembling harder. "I'm not going to hurt you." It took nearly 20 minutes of patient coaxing before the creature allowed Ethan close enough to wrap it in his jacket. The nearest veterinarian was in town, 30 minutes away, but the animal shelter wouldn't open until Monday. 2 days from now. Back at the cabin, Ethan fashioned a makeshift bed from an old cardboard box and towels. He warmed some milk on the stove and offered it in a shallow bowl, watching as the tiny animal lapped at it hungrily. Just until Monday, Ethan told himself firmly. Then you're going to the shelter. That evening, Ethan called the only neighbor he somewhat trusted, an elderly woman named Martha, who lived down the road and was known for taking in strays. "No collar?" she asked after he described his find. "Nothing. Looks too young to be on its own. Could be from one of the farms over in the valley. Spring litters are common. Want me to ask around?" "If it's not too much trouble," Ethan replied. "I'll make some calls. In the meantime, keep it warm and try some soft dog food if you can. Poor thing's probably hungry." The next morning, Ethan drove to the general store and purchased puppy food, a small collar, and a few toys, ignoring the curious glances from the cashier. By the time he returned, the pup had managed to climb out of its box and was exploring the living room with cautious determination. "You're feeling better." "Huh." Ethan found himself smiling as the creature attempted to climb the couch, its stubby legs scrambling for purchase. Martha called that afternoon. "No one's missing a puppy, at least not one that matches your description. Logan's hunting dog had a litter last month, but they were all accounted for and spoken for. What about strays? Any reports of a mother dog in the area?" "Nothing," Martha replied. "You thinking of keeping it?" "No," Ethan said quickly. "Just until I can get it to the shelter." But that night, as the pup curled against his chest while he read on the couch, Ethan felt a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. The creature trusted him completely, its tiny body rising and falling with each breath. Monday came, and Ethan found himself inventing excuses not to drive to the shelter. By Wednesday, he'd ordered a proper dog bed and more supplies online. When the weekend arrived, he admitted to himself what had already become obvious. The pup was staying. "Guess you need a name," he told the animal as it playfully attacked his shoelaces. The pup looked up, head tilted in that curious way dogs have. "How about Hunter?" The name felt right somehow. In the 2 weeks that followed, Hunter became Ethan's shadow, following him from room to room, waiting patiently by the door when he went out, and sleeping at the foot of his bed at night. For the first time since moving to Blackridge, Ethan found himself talking out loud to Hunter about his day, about the weather, sometimes even about Sarah and James. The animal would watch him with those intelligent dark eyes, as if understanding every word. "You're good company," Ethan admitted one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Better than most people I've known." Hunter had peculiar habits that Ethan attributed to whatever mix of breeds had produced him. He preferred raw meat to dog food, loved climbing more than running, and had an uncanny ability to open cabinet doors with his paws. His appetite was voracious, and he grew at an astonishing rate. By the end of summer, Hunter had nearly tripled in size, his brown puppy fur giving way to a darker coat that gleamed almost black in certain light. Ethan told himself this was normal for large breed dogs, though he couldn't help noticing that Hunter's features were developing in unusual ways, his snout longer than a typical dog's, his ears remaining surprisingly round. "Just a mutt," Ethan would say whenever Martha asked about Hunter's breed during her occasional visits. "Probably got some Newfoundland in him, maybe some Shepherd." But as autumn arrived and Hunter continued to grow, even Ethan had to admit there was something unusual about his new companion, something he couldn't quite put his finger on, but that would eventually change everything. A year passed with surprising speed. Ethan's life, once measured in the monotonous rhythm of solitary days, now revolved around Hunter, their morning hikes through the forest, afternoon training sessions, and quiet evenings by the fire had become the framework of a routine that, for the first time since Afghanistan, gave Ethan a sense of purpose. But as winter thawed into spring again, even Ethan could no longer ignore the obvious. Hunter was no ordinary dog. At 16 months old, he weighed close to 90 pounds, with paws the size of Ethan's palm and a distinctive rolling gait that seemed more ursine than canine. His diet had evolved from standard dog food to an insatiable appetite for fish, berries, and raw meat that Ethan supplied through increasingly frequent hunting trips. "That's one hell of a dog you've got there," Sheriff Doug Winters remarked one April afternoon when he stopped by Ethan's property on what he called a routine wellness check. The sheriff, a stocky man in his 60s with silver hair and perpetually sun-reddened cheeks, had made these visits every few months since Ethan had moved to Blackridge. Hunter observed the sheriff from behind Ethan's legs, uncharacteristically shy around the visitor. "He's still growing," Ethan replied, attempting to sound casual while positioning himself between Hunter and the sheriff's curious gaze. "What breed did you say he was again?" Winters asked, his weathered face creasing as he squinted at Hunter. "Mix? Probably some Newfoundland, maybe some Caucasian Shepherd." The sheriff nodded slowly, unconvinced. "Big dogs need proper training. Wouldn't want any incidents with hikers come summer." "He's well behaved," Ethan said defensively, "and we stick to our property." After the sheriff left, Ethan watched Hunter climb a tree in the backyard with disturbing ease. hanging from a branch by his front paws before dropping gracefully to the ground. No dog, not even the most athletic, moved like that. 3 days later, a pickup truck with Black Ridge Veterinary Services painted on the door pulled into Ethan's driveway. A woman in her mid-30s stepped out. Her auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore jeans, hiking boots, and a fleece vest over a plaid shirt, the unofficial uniform of rural Montana. "Mr. Calloway, I'm Dr. Sarah Blackwood." She introduced herself with a firm handshake. "Doug mentioned you've got a dog that might need some attention." Ethan tensed. "Hunter's fine. Sheriff Winters had no business sending you out here." "He mentioned your dog is quite large for his age," she continued, undeterred. "I'm the only vet in a 50-mile radius. Large breed dogs often develop joint issues early. Just thought I'd offer my services." Before Ethan could protest further, Hunter lumbered around the corner of the cabin, carrying a small log in his mouth like a trophy. He dropped it at the sight of the stranger and let out a low, rumbling sound from deep in his chest. "Doctor." Blackwood froze, her professional smile faltering as she took in Hunter's size. His distinctive profile, the way he reared slightly on his hind legs to better observe her. "That's not a dog," she said quietly. "Of course he is," Ethan replied, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Mr. Calloway, I've treated every type of dog in this county, from Chihuahuas to Irish wolfhounds. What you have there is—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Well, I'm not entirely sure, but I'd like to examine him." Something in her tone, professional curiosity rather than accusation, made Ethan relent. He called Hunter to his side, stroking the thick fur at the scruff of his neck. "He doesn't much like strangers." "I'll be gentle," she promised, slowly approaching and kneeling to Hunter's level. "Hey there, big guy. There. Mind if I take a look at you?" To Ethan's surprise, Hunter allowed Dr. Blackwood to run her hands along his body, examining his teeth, ears, and paws with methodical precision. She said nothing for several minutes, but her expression grew increasingly troubled. "Mr. Calloway, where did you get him?" she finally asked, straightening up. "Found him after a storm. He was just a pup, alone under a fallen tree. And you never questioned what kind of animal he might be." Ethan shrugged uncomfortably. "Figured he was a mutt. By the time he started getting big, we were—" He struggled to find the right words. "We were used to each other. Doctor—" Blackwood ran a hand through her hair, dislodging her ponytail. "Mr. Calloway, I believe what you have here is not a dog at all. The dental structure, the paw configuration, the shoulder height relative to length, these are all consistent with an American black bear, probably around 16 to 18 months old based on his development." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. A bear. He'd been living with a bear for over a year. "That's impossible," he said reflexively, even as his mind raced through a catalog of Hunter's peculiarities, his climbing ability, his hibernation-like deep sleep during the coldest winter months, his preference for berries and fish. "I'm afraid it's not only possible, it's certain." "Doctor," Blackwood replied. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. "I should call Fish and Wildlife." There are protocols for situations like this." Ethan stepped between her and Hunter. "No, he's not dangerous. He's never hurt anyone. Mr. Calloway, keeping a wild animal, especially a predator, is illegal in Montana. He's going to get much bigger, potentially over 200 pounds. Even if he's docile now, he's still a wild animal with instincts you can't control." Hunter seemed to sense the tension, moving closer to press against Ethan's leg. The gesture, so familiar and dog-like, strengthened Ethan's resolve. "Please," he said, his voice low. "Just give me some time to figure this out. He's all I've got." Dr. Blackwood studied him for a long moment, conflict evident in her expression. Finally, she sighed. "I could lose my license for this, but 1 week. You have 1 week to make arrangements before I'm legally obligated to report this." After she left, Ethan sat on the porch steps, Hunter's massive head resting in his lap. He ran his fingers through the thick black fur, wondering how he'd been so blind. Or perhaps he'd known all along and simply couldn't bear to acknowledge it. "What am I going to do with you?" he whispered. Hunter looked up at him with those intelligent dark eyes, and Ethan saw no wildness there, no danger, only the same loyal companionship that had pulled him back from the brink of despair. Bear or not, Hunter was family, and Ethan had already lost too much family to surrender without a fight. That night, Ethan made 2 decisions. He would not give up Hunter, and no one else could know the truth, at least not until he figured out a way to keep them both safe. The following months unfolded in a precarious balance between caution and denial. Ethan constructed a higher fence around his property, posted "no trespassing" signs along its perimeter, and began taking Hunter deeper into the national forest for exercise. Always at dawn or dusk, when they were least likely to encounter hikers. Their excursions became longer, more elaborate, as Hunter's size and strength continued to increase at an alarming rate. By autumn, Hunter had reached nearly 140 pounds. His formerly rounded face had elongated into the distinctive profile of an adult black bear, complete with a prominent snout and small, rounded ears. He moved with the rolling, pigeon-toed gait characteristic of his species, though he still came when Ethan called his name and sat obediently for meals that now consisted primarily of fish Ethan caught from the stream that bordered his property, supplemented with berries, roots, and occasional deer meat from Ethan's hunting trips. "You're getting expensive to feed," Ethan remarked one evening as Hunter devoured his 3rd trout. The bear looked up briefly, dark eyes gleaming in the porch light, before returning to his meal. Dr. Blackwood had kept her word about the 1-week grace period, then extended it indefinitely after several tense conversations with Ethan. She began making regular visits to the cabin, bringing medical supplies and books on bear behavior that she discreetly borrowed from the university library in Missoula. "He's remarkably well socialized," she noted during one such visit, watching Hunter climb one of the pines at the edge of the clearing. "Bears are naturally solitary animals, but he's clearly bonded with you as his family unit. So he's not going to suddenly turn on me?" Ethan asked, voicing the fear that occasionally kept him awake at night. Sarah, they were on a first-name basis now, shook her head. "I don't think so. You raised him from infancy, and he's never shown aggression toward you. But Ethan, He's going to get bigger, much bigger. Adult male black bears can reach over 300 pounds in the wild. He'll stay around 200, Ethan said confidently. His mother was probably on the smaller side. Sarah gave him a look that suggested she thought he was still in denial but was too polite to say so. Just be careful and keep him hidden. If anyone else realizes what he is. She didn't need to finish the thought. Montana had strict wildlife regulations, and the illegal possession of a bear would result in Hunter's immediate removal, or worse, if he was deemed a threat to public safety. The first snow of winter was falling when Ethan's carefully constructed world began to unravel. He was chopping firewood when the familiar sound of an approaching vehicle made him tense. Hunter, who had been lounging on the porch, immediately retreated into the cabin, a behavior Ethan had trained into him at the first sign of visitors. A forest green SUV with the Department of Fish, Wildlife and Parks logo on the door, pulled into the driveway. A woman stepped out, tall and athletic, with short-cropped dark hair and the confident bearing of someone comfortable in the wilderness. She wore the department's uniform and carried a clipboard. "Mr. Calloway," she called, approaching with an outstretched hand. "I'm Dr. Rebecca Thornton, wildlife specialist with FWP. Do you have a moment to talk?" Ethan shook her hand briefly, his mouth dry. "What can I do for you?" "We've had reports of unusual wildlife activity in this area. A hiker claimed to have spotted a black bear unusually close to residential property. This property, specifically," she consulted her clipboard. "Bears should be in hibernation this time of year, so we're investigating any sightings." "Haven't seen any bears," Ethan replied, too quickly. "Just the usual deer, maybe some coyotes." Dr. Thornton nodded, making a note. "Mind if I take a look around your property? Bears are attracted to food sources. If there's anything drawing them to this area, we'd like to identify it before there's an incident." Before Ethan could formulate a reasonable objection, a crash sounded from inside the cabin. "Doctor?" Thornton's head snapped toward the noise, her eyebrows raising. "Someone else home with you. Just my dog," Ethan said. "Probably knocked something over." As if on cue, Hunter let out a sound, not quite a bark, more like a low, rumbling groan that no dog had ever made. "Doctor?" Thornton's expression changed from professional curiosity to sharp suspicion. "That's an unusual-sounding dog," she observed, already moving toward the cabin door. Ethan stepped into her path. "He's not good with strangers." "Mr. Calloway," Dr. Thornton said carefully. "I've worked with wildlife for 15 years. What I just heard wasn't a dog." Their standoff might have continued if Hunter hadn't chosen that moment to push open the cabin door, which Ethan had failed to latch properly in his haste to intercept the visitor. The bear lumbered onto the porch, curious about the stranger but showing no sign of aggression. Dr. Thornton went completely still. "Jesus Christ," she whispered. Hunter, sensing no immediate threat, sat on his haunches and tilted his head in that curious gesture he'd maintained since puppyhood. Despite the gravity of the situation, Ethan felt a surge of pride at how magnificent Hunter looked, his black coat glossy in the winter light, his powerful shoulders and intelligent eyes a testament to the remarkable creature he'd become. "I can explain," Ethan started, though he had no idea what explanation could possibly suffice. "You're keeping a black bear as a pet," Dr. Thornton stated flatly. Do you have any idea how many federal and state wildlife regulations you're violating? Not to mention the danger you're putting yourself and others in. He's not dangerous, Ethan insisted. I found him as a cub after a storm. I thought he was a puppy. By the time I realized what he was... You should have contacted wildlife authorities immediately, she cut in, her voice hard. This animal belongs in the wild or in a proper sanctuary, not in someone's cabin playing house dog. Hunter, perhaps sensing her hostility, retreated to Ethan's side, pressing against his leg in a gesture that had become familiar over their years together. The simple act of trust wasn't lost on Dr. Thornton, whose expression softened slightly. "How long have you had him?" she asked, her tone less accusatory. "Almost 2 years. Found him in spring of 2018. She studied Hunter with professional interest. "He's remarkably calm around humans. Most bears his age would be showing territorial aggression, especially with a stranger present." "He's never been aggressive," Ethan said. "Not with me. Not with anyone. The vet visits him regularly. A vet knows about this and hasn't reported it." Dr. Thornton's eyebrows shot up. "She's been helping me figure out what to do," Ethan admitted. "Look, I know this isn't ideal, but Hunter's different. He was raised with humans from infancy. He doesn't know how to be a wild bear." Dr. Thornton sighed, running a hand through her short hair. "Mr. Calloway, regardless of how docile he seems, that's an American black bear approaching physical maturity. He's going to get bigger, stronger, and eventually, his natural instincts will surface. This situation isn't sustainable." "What will happen to him if you report this?" Ethan asked, though he already knew the answer. "Best case scenario. Relocation to a wildlife sanctuary. Though most are at capacity. Worst case." She didn't finish, but her meaning was clear. Ethan felt sick. The thought of Hunter being euthanized because of his mistake was unbearable. "Please," he said, his voice lower than he intended. "There has to be another option." Something in his tone must have reached her, because Dr. Thornton's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "Look, I'm not heartless. I can see there's a bond here. But my job is wildlife conservation and public safety. I can't just ignore this." "Give me time," Ethan pleaded. "Let me work with you to figure out a solution that doesn't end with Hunter being put down." Dr. Thornton studied him for a long moment, then shifted her gaze to Hunter, who had settled at Ethan's feet, seemingly untroubled by the tension between the humans. "I'll need to report this," she finally said. "But I could emphasize the unusual circumstances, his socialization, his non-aggressive behavior. It might buy us some time to explore options." "Thank you," Ethan said, relief flooding through him. "Don't thank me yet," she warned. "And we need to establish some ground rules. No more letting him roam outside unattended. No hiking where you might encounter others." "I'll be checking in regularly, and at the first sign of aggressive behavior, all bets are off." After she left, Ethan sank onto the porch steps, the full weight of the situation finally hitting him. Hunter nudged his arm with his snout, making a soft whuffing sound that Ethan had come to recognize as concern. "We're in trouble, buddy," Ethan told him, scratching behind those round ears. "But we'll figure it out. I promise." True to her word, Dr. Thornton returned 3 days later with a stack of books on bear behavior and rehabilitation, along with a more formal assessment plan. To Ethan's surprise, she was accompanied by Sarah. "Dr. Blackwood has been filling me in on Hunter's medical history," Rebecca explained as they sat at Ethan's kitchen table. Hunter lounged in the corner, watching the proceedings with mild interest. "I have to say, your record-keeping is impressive for someone with no wildlife training." Sarah shot Ethan a small, encouraging smile. "I told Dr. Thornton how responsive Hunter has been to basic training and how he's never shown signs of food aggression or territorial behavior." "Which is remarkable," Rebecca added, "but doesn't change the fundamental issue. Hunter is a wild animal, and keeping him in a domestic setting is both illegal and potentially dangerous." Over the following weeks, a tentative partnership formed between Ethan and the two women. Rebecca brought specialized equipment, a larger enclosure that adjoined the cabin, enrichment toys designed for captive bears, and a more appropriate feeding regimen. Sarah continued monitoring Hunter's health, documenting his growth and behavior for what Rebecca called the inevitable legal proceedings. Winter deepened around them, snow piling high against the cabin walls. Unlike a truly wild bear, Hunter didn't hibernate, though he did sleep more and eat less during the coldest months, a compromise between his natural instincts and his domesticated upbringing. Ethan found himself unexpectedly grateful for the regular visits from Rebecca and Sarah, which broke the isolation that had defined his life for so long. They brought news from town, professional insights, and most importantly, a shared commitment to Hunter's welfare that made Ethan feel less alone in his strange predicament. By early February, Hunter had grown to nearly 170 pounds, his frame filling out with muscle as he matured. Despite his increasing size, he remained gentle with Ethan, still seeking affection and responding to basic commands like a well-trained dog. "He's helping you," Sarah observed one evening as they watched Hunter play with a large rubber ball filled with frozen berries, one of Rebecca's enrichment ideas. "With your PTSD, I mean," Ethan glanced at her, surprised. He hadn't spoken much about his military service or its aftermath. "Doug mentioned it," she explained, looking slightly embarrassed. "Not details, just that you'd had a rough time after your discharge. Hunter gives me something to focus on besides the noise in my head," Ethan admitted. "Having him around, it's like an anchor. Keeps me present." "Animals can be incredibly therapeutic." Sarah nodded. "There are formal programs that pair veterans with service animals." "Bet they don't use bears, though," Ethan said with a wry smile. Their moment of connection was interrupted by the sound of an approaching snowmobile. Hunter immediately retreated to his enclosure, a behavior that had become automatic at the first sign of visitors. Rebecca appeared at the door moments later, her expression grave. "We've got a problem," she announced without preamble. "A hiker posted photos online yesterday. Distant shots of what he claimed was a monster black dog near Black Ridge Forest. The photos are blurry, but to anyone who knows what they're looking at, it's obviously a bear," Ethan finished, his stomach sinking. "The post is getting attention," Rebecca continued. "Local hunting forums are buzzing about it. Some are speculating it's a wolf. Others are claiming it's a bear that hasn't properly hibernated, which makes it potentially dangerous and disoriented. Hunter hasn't been outside the enclosure except for supervised exercise," Ethan protested. I believe you, Rebecca said. But the damage is done. People are talking, and some are suggesting an organized hunt to eliminate the threat before spring hiking season. That's insane, Sarah interjected. They can't just organize a hunting party based on some blurry photos. Technically, no, Rebecca agreed. Bear hunting is regulated. But if someone claims they felt threatened, or if a landowner shoots a predator they believe is threatening their livestock, Montana law gives them considerable leeway. The implications hung heavy in the air. Hunter, who had never harmed anyone, who wouldn't know to fear humans with guns, would be helpless against a determined hunting party. What do we do? Ethan asked, his military training kicking in. Identify the threat, develop a strategy, execute. I've been making calls to wildlife sanctuaries across the country, Rebecca replied. Most are at capacity, but there's a facility in Wyoming that specializes in bears that can't be released back into the wild. They might have space, but there's a waiting list, and they'd need to evaluate Hunter first. How long would that take? Weeks, maybe months. And that's assuming I can convince my superiors to consider placement rather than euthanasia. The word landed like a physical blow. Ethan looked out the window to where Hunter was now dozing in his enclosure, peaceful and trusting, unaware that his fate was being decided by forces beyond his comprehension. There's something else, Sarah said quietly. People in town are talking. Tyler Morrison came into the clinic yesterday asking pointed questions about that Army guy's unusual dog. Tyler's one of the most active hunters in the county. I know who he is, Ethan said grimly. Tyler had a reputation for taking trophies, often pushing the boundaries of hunting regulations. The thought of Hunter's hide hanging on Tyler's wall made Ethan's blood run cold. As February gave way to March, the situation grew increasingly tense. More alleged sightings were reported, each one drawing additional attention to the Black Ridge Forest area. Rebecca fielded questions from her superiors, maintaining that she was investigating but downplaying the credibility of the reports. Sarah kept her ears open in town, warning Ethan whenever the rumors seemed to be gaining traction. Hunter, blissfully unaware of the controversy surrounding him, continued to thrive under Ethan's care. He now weighed nearly 190 pounds, his black coat thick and healthy, his movements a curious blend of bear-like strength and dog-like responsiveness to Ethan's commands. The nightmares that had plagued Ethan since Afghanistan had diminished significantly. On the rare occasions when he woke, gasping from visions of IEDs and fallen comrades, Hunter would pad over from his bed in the corner, resting his massive head on Ethan's chest until the racing of his heart subsided. "You saved me. You know that," Ethan told him during one such episode, scratching the bear's ears in the darkness. "Now I need to save you." His opportunity came sooner than expected. Rebecca arrived one afternoon in late March, her usual composed demeanor replaced by barely contained excitement. "I think I've found a solution," she announced, spreading papers across Ethan's kitchen table. "The Wyoming sanctuary can't take Hunter. They're at capacity until summer at least. But I've been consulting with a colleague at University of Montana who specializes in bear genetics." Ethan leaned forward, trying to make sense of the charts and data before him. "What am I looking at?" "These are DNA analyses from various black bear populations in the northern Rockies," Rebecca explained. "Based on the physical measurements and photographs I've been taking of Hunter, my colleague believes he may belong to a specific genetic subpopulation that was thought to be extinct in this region. Extinct? What does that mean for Hunter? It means he could be incredibly valuable from a conservation perspective, Rebecca said, her eyes bright with professional enthusiasm. If my colleague is right, Hunter represents genetic diversity that wildlife managers have been trying to re-establish in this ecosystem for decades. For the first time in months, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope. So instead of being an illegal pet, he's a conservation opportunity. Potentially, Rebecca cautioned. We'd need to confirm with genetic testing, which means involving more officials. It's a calculated risk. Bringing more attention to Hunter could backfire. But if we're right, it would significantly strengthen our case for special handling rather than standard protocol. As they discussed the details of this new development, Sarah's truck pulled up outside, its tires crunching on the gravel driveway. She burst through the door without knocking, her face flushed. "Tyler Morrison is organizing a hunting party," she announced without preamble. "He's convinced there's a rogue bear in the area, and he's gathering men to track it this weekend. I overheard him at the diner." The brief moment of hope evaporated. "This weekend," Ethan repeated. "That's less than 3 days away." They're meeting at the Red Pine Tavern Friday night, heading out at dawn Saturday. Sarah confirmed. "Tyler's been drinking and boasting about mounting the bear's head in his living room." Rebecca swore under her breath. "I can try to get Fish and Wildlife to intervene, claim jurisdiction over any bear hunting in the area, but with the current reporting system—" "It would take too long," Ethan finished. He'd seen enough bureaucracy during his military service to know how these things worked. By the time the proper channels were navigated, Hunter could be dead. "We need to move him," Sarah suggested. "Get him somewhere safe until we can implement Rebecca's genetic testing plan. Move a 200-pound bear without attracting attention in a town of 800 people where everyone's already talking about him." Ethan shook his head. "Not possible." "Then what do we do?" Sarah asked, her voice rising with frustration. "We can't just sit here and wait for Tyler and his friends to show up with rifles." Ethan was quiet for a moment, his mind racing through options, evaluating and discarding scenarios with the tactical precision that had kept him alive in Afghanistan. Finally, he looked up, his decision made. "We prepare," he said simply. "Rebecca, you said the Wyoming sanctuary can't take him until summer, but is there anywhere on their property he could stay temporarily? An unused enclosure, a quarantine area?" Rebecca considered this. "Possibly. I'd need to make some calls." "Do it. Sarah, I need you to keep your ear to the ground in town. Any change in Tyler's plans, I need to know immediately." "What are you going to do?" Sarah asked. Ethan looked out the window to where Hunter was sunning himself in the enclosure, peaceful and trusting. "I'm going to get ready to protect what's mine." The morning of Tyler Morrison's planned hunt dawned cold and clear, with a fresh dusting of snow that would make tracking anything, especially a large bear, childishly simple. Ethan had barely slept, alternating between watching the forest edge through his rifle scope and checking on Hunter in the reinforced enclosure behind the cabin. Rebecca had worked miracles over the past 72 hours, calling in favors and navigating bureaucracy with relentless determination. She'd secured a temporary holding space at a wildlife rehabilitation center outside Missoula. Not ideal, but a sanctuary of sorts where Hunter would be safe from Tyler's hunting party while they pursued the genetic testing angle. "The transport truck will be here at noon," she reminded Ethan, her breath fogging in the frigid air as they stood on his porch. "If we can keep Hunter hidden until then, we've got a chance." Sarah had arrived before dawn, her truck loaded with medical supplies just in case, as she put it. The unspoken fear that hung between the three of them was that Tyler and his friends might shoot first and ask questions later if they spotted anything bear-like on Ethan's property. "Tyler gathered at least 6 men last night," Sarah reported, warming her hands around a mug of coffee. "They were drinking heavily at the Red Pine, talking about splitting up to cover more ground. From what I overheard, they're planning to start at the Northern Trail and work their way south. That puts them about 4 miles from here, at least initially." Ethan calculated. He'd spent enough time in these woods to know every trail and clearing. "But if they split up, they could stumble onto your property from multiple directions," Rebecca finished grimly. A distant engine sound made them all tense. Ethan grabbed his binoculars and scanned the access road that wound through the valley below. A procession of 3 pickup trucks was making its way along the Forest Service road, heading toward the northern trailhead. "That's them," Sarah confirmed, squinting at the distinctive lifted truck in the lead. "Tyler's compensating for something monster truck is unmistakable." Under different circumstances, Ethan might have smiled at her description. Now, he just felt a cold knot of dread in his stomach. "Let's get Hunter inside the cabin. I don't want him visible from any angle." Moving a nearly 200-pound bear who didn't particularly want to be moved proved challenging. Hunter had grown increasingly restless over the past 24 hours, as if sensing the tension radiating from his human companions. He paced the enclosure, making low, rumbling sounds that carried unnervingly through the crisp morning air. "He knows something's wrong," Ethan said as he coaxed Hunter toward the cabin's rear door with pieces of salmon, the bear's favorite treat. "Animals have keen instincts for danger," Rebecca agreed. "The fact that he's not exhibiting defensive aggression is remarkable. A wild bear would be in full threat display by now." Once inside, Hunter settled reluctantly in the corner of Ethan's living room, his dark eyes tracking every movement as the humans continued their preparations. Ethan checked his watch, 8:17 a.m., less than 4 hours until the transport truck would arrive. "I should check the perimeter," he said, reaching for his jacket. "I'll come with you," Rebecca offered. 4 eyes are better than 2. They had just reached the edge of the clearing when the sharp crack of a rifle shot echoed through the valley, followed by several more in quick succession. "That's too close," Ethan muttered, instinctively dropping into a crouch. Rebecca pulled out her phone. "No service. Typical." She turned to Ethan, her expression grave. "Those shots were from the eastern ridge. Tyler's group must have split up more widely than we anticipated." Another volley of shots, closer this time, followed by the distant sound of men's voices calling to each other. Ethan's military training kicked in, his senses sharpening as adrenaline flooded his system. "Back to the cabin," he ordered. "Now!" They found Sarah at the window, her face pale. "I counted at least 4 different firearms," she reported, "and they're getting closer." Ethan's mind raced through scenarios, each one worse than the last. If Tyler's group reached his property and spotted Hunter, no amount of explanation would prevent them from viewing the bear as a trophy or a threat, even with his military background. Ethan couldn't hold off 6 armed men determined to kill what they saw as a dangerous predator. "The transport truck won't be here for hours," Rebecca said, voicing what they were all thinking. "We need to hide Hunter somewhere they won't look." "The cellar," Ethan decided, moving toward the trapdoor in the kitchen floor. "It's not ideal, but it's our best option right now." Convincing Hunter to descend the narrow stairs into the dark storage space beneath the cabin proved nearly impossible. The bear balked at the entrance, rising onto his hind legs and letting out a distressed sound that was neither growl nor whine. "He hates confined spaces," Ethan explained, frustration edging his voice. "Always has, ever since he was small." "We don't have time for this," Sarah said, glancing nervously out the window. "They could be here any minute." As if to punctuate her words, a shout came from the forest edge, followed by the sound of breaking branches. Ethan peered through the window to see 2 figures emerging from the tree line, rifles held ready. Tyler and Jim Branson. Sarah identified them in a whisper. "The others can't be far behind." Ethan made a split-second decision. Change of plans. "Rebecca, you and Sarah go out the front. Distract them with your official capacity. Tell them you're conducting a wildlife survey. Whatever you need to say to get them off my property." "And what will you do?" Rebecca asked, already reaching for her fish and wildlife jacket. "Hunter and I are going out the back. There's an old mining trail that runs behind the property. If we can reach it without being seen, we might be able to circle around to the north ridge where the transport can meet us." "That's at least 3 miles through rough terrain," Sarah protested. "With a full-grown bear in tow." "You got a better idea," Ethan challenged, already moving to gather essential supplies. Water, some food for Hunter, a first aid kit. After a moment of tense silence, Rebecca nodded. "It's risky, but it could work. I'll call the transport team, redirect them to the North Ridge access point." She turned to Sarah. "We need to buy them as much time as possible." Ethan watched through the window as the 2 women emerged from the front of the cabin, Rebecca's authoritative stance immediately drawing Tyler's attention. He couldn't hear their words, but he could see Tyler's aggressive posture, the way he gestured with his rifle as he argued with her. "Now's our chance," Ethan murmured to Hunter, leading the bear toward the back door. "Stay close to me, buddy. And for once in your life, be quiet." They slipped out the rear entrance and hugged the shadow of the cabin until they reached the tree line. Hunter seemed to sense the need for stealth, moving with surprising grace for a creature his size. They had just disappeared into the cover of the pines when Ethan heard Tyler's voice rise in anger. "I don't care what government agency you're from. We've got reports of a dangerous animal, and we've got every right to protect our community." Ethan quickened his pace, guiding Hunter deeper into the forest. The old mining trail was barely visible, overgrown from years of disuse, but it offered the most direct route to the North Ridge. The snow made silent movement impossible, but it also covered their tracks quickly as fresh flakes began to fall. They had been moving for perhaps 20 minutes when the distant sound of shouting reached them, followed by the bark of orders, Tyler organizing a search pattern. Ethan's heart sank. Rebecca and Sarah had clearly lost the argument. "We need to move faster," he urged Hunter, who was sniffing curiously at the base of a large pine. The bear looked at him with those intelligent eyes, then surprised Ethan by breaking into a loping run along the trail, as if he finally understood the urgency of their situation. Ethan jogged behind him, grateful for his military conditioning as they covered ground quickly despite the challenging terrain. The forest grew denser as they climbed, the old mining trail switchbacking up the steep mountainside. Ethan's breath came in ragged clouds, his legs burning with the effort. Hunter showed no signs of fatigue, his powerful body designed for exactly this kind of movement through wilderness. They had almost reached the ridge when the first shot whistled past them, splintering bark from a tree just feet away. Ethan dropped instinctively, pulling Hunter down beside him as he scanned the forest below. 3 figures were visible through the trees, working their way up the slope. Tyler was in the lead, his rifle raised for another shot. "We've got it cornered," his voice carried up the mountainside. "Jim, circle around to the left." Ethan's mind raced. The North Ridge was still a quarter-mile away. They'd never make it with Tyler's group in pursuit. "Come on," he whispered to Hunter, directing the bear toward a denser patch of forest to their right. If they could lose their pursuers in the thick growth, they might still have a chance to circle back to the ridge. But Hunter had other ideas. Instead of following Ethan, the bear rose to his full height, nearly 7 feet tall on his hind legs, and let out a roar that echoed through the mountains, a sound so primal and powerful that Ethan felt it in his chest. Then, to Ethan's horror, Hunter dropped to all fours and charged, not away from danger, but directly toward it. "Hunter, no!" Ethan shouted, but it was too late. The massive black bear thundered down the slope, snow flying in his wake, straight toward the hunters. Tyler raised his rifle, taking aim at the charging animal. Ethan didn't think. He ran, throwing himself down the mountain with reckless abandon, desperate to reach Hunter before Tyler could fire. Time seemed to slow, each second stretching into an eternity as he watched Tyler's finger tighten on the trigger. The rifle cracked, but Hunter didn't fall. He swerved at the last moment, the bullet missing its mark, and barreled into the underbrush beside the hunters, disappearing from view. Confused shouts erupted from Tyler's group. Ethan used the distraction to close the distance, emerging from the trees with his hands raised. "Stop shooting!" he yelled. "That's my bear!" Tyler spun toward him, rifle still raised. "Your bear? What the hell are you talking about? Calloway." "His name is Hunter," Ethan said, moving slowly closer, hands still visible. "He's been with me for 3 years. He's not dangerous." "That thing just charged us," Jim Branson shouted, his own rifle sweeping the underbrush where Hunter had disappeared. "He was protecting me," Ethan insisted, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. "Please, lower your weapons. Let me call him back." "You're insane," Tyler spat. "That's a wild animal, a predator. It needs to be put down before it attacks someone." "He's never attacked anyone," Ethan argued, desperately trying to locate Hunter in the dense undergrowth. "He's been living with me since he was a cub." "That's illegal," the third hunter said, a younger man Ethan didn't recognize. "You can't just keep a bear as a pet." "I know that now," Ethan acknowledged. "We're working with Fish and Wildlife to relocate him properly. The transport is meeting us at the North Ridge today." Tyler's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Is that what those women were doing at your cabin, helping you hide this thing?" Before Ethan could answer, a low growl emanated from the brush to their right. All 3 hunters swung their rifles toward the sound. "Hunter, stay!" Ethan commanded, using the firm tone that had always worked before. To his relief, the growling stopped. "Listen to me," Ethan said, focusing on Tyler. "Hunter isn't a threat. He's confused and scared right now. Let me take him to the transport. They're waiting to move him to a proper sanctuary. So you admit you've been keeping an illegal, dangerous animal on your property, right next to where people hike and camp? Tyler demanded, his finger still hovering near the trigger. You've put the entire community at risk. No one has been at risk, Ethan insisted. Hunter has never left my property unattended. He's well-trained and non-aggressive. Non-aggressive, Jim scoffed. It just charged us like it was going for the kill. A new voice joined the standoff. Actually, if he wanted to kill you, you'd already be dead. Rebecca emerged from the trees, her Fish and Wildlife badge prominently displayed. Sarah was behind her, along with 2 uniformed conservation officers. Mr. Morrison, Rebecca addressed Tyler formally. I'm going to have to ask you to lower your weapon. You're interfering with an official Fish and Wildlife operation. Tyler hesitated, clearly unwilling to surrender his position of power. What operation? Helping this guy hide a dangerous animal? Relocating a unique wildlife specimen? Rebecca corrected him. This bear is part of a genetic subpopulation we've been monitoring. Mr. Calloway has been cooperating with our department to facilitate safe transport. It was a strategic lie, bending the truth just enough to establish authority without revealing Hunter's actual history. Ethan silently thanked her for quick thinking. We have a transport vehicle waiting at the North Ridge, Rebecca continued. These officers will escort Mr. Calloway and the bear to that location. Your hunting party is to stand down immediately. The standoff stretched for several tense seconds. Then, reluctantly, Tyler lowered his rifle. The others followed suit. This isn't over, Calloway, Tyler warned. Keeping dangerous wildlife is a criminal offense. You'll answer for this. I'm sure Mr. Calloway is prepared to face any appropriate consequences, Rebecca replied smoothly. Now, please return to town. This area is temporarily restricted for wildlife management operations. As the grumbling hunters retreated down the mountain, Ethan felt a wave of relief so powerful his knees nearly buckled. Hunter, he called softly. Come on out, buddy. It's safe now. The undergrowth rustled, and Hunter emerged, looking remarkably composed despite the chaos. He padded over to Ethan and pressed his massive head against Ethan's chest, a gesture of affection he'd maintained since cubhood. You scared me half to death, Ethan murmured, burying his fingers in the thick fur. What were you thinking, charging at armed men like that? He was protecting you, Sarah said quietly, coming to stand beside them. Bears are remarkably loyal to their family groups. In his mind, you're his family. Ethan looked up at her, then at Rebecca and the conservation officers, who were keeping a respectful distance. What happens now? Now we get him to the transport, Rebecca answered. And then we have some serious discussions about Hunter's future and yours. The sanctuary transport, a reinforced wildlife trailer pulled by a heavy-duty pickup, waited at the North Ridge access point just as Rebecca had arranged. 2 animal handlers in khaki uniforms stood ready with specialized equipment, their faces registering surprise as they observed Hunter walking calmly beside Ethan, unrestrained and seemingly at ease despite the chaos of the past hour. That's the bear, one of them asked Rebecca, eyebrows raised. I was expecting to have to tranquilize an aggressive animal. Hunter is unique, Rebecca explained. the professional detachment in her voice not quite masking her own amazement at the bear's behavior. "Mr. Calloway has raised him since infancy." The journey up the final stretch of mountain had been tense but uneventful. Tyler and his hunting party had retreated back to town, though Ethan harbored no illusions about the trouble that would follow. Word would spread quickly through Blackridge. The reclusive veteran had been keeping a full-grown black bear as a pet, endangering the community for years. The legal repercussions would come soon enough. But in this moment, Ethan's only concern was Hunter's safety. The bear seemed to sense the gravity of the situation, staying unusually close to Ethan's side as they approached the transport vehicle. "He'll need to be sedated for the journey," the lead handler explained, preparing a tranquilizer gun. "Standard protocol for transporting large predators." Ethan felt a knot form in his throat. "Can I stay with him? At least until he falls asleep?" The handler exchanged glances with Rebecca, who nodded her approval. "Just keep him calm. The calmer he is, the easier this will be on him." Kneeling beside Hunter, Ethan ran his fingers through the thick fur at the scruff of the bear's neck. "This is for your own good, buddy," he murmured. "These people are going to take care of you." Hunter's dark eyes fixed on Ethan with that uncanny intelligence that had always made him seem more than just an animal. He made a soft, huffing sound, pressing his head against Ethan's chest in a gesture that felt heartbreakingly like forgiveness. The dart struck Hunter's hindquarter with a soft thwack. The bear flinched, but didn't growl or run, instead looking at Ethan with what seemed like confusion. "It's okay," Ethan soothed, keeping his hands on Hunter's fur as the sedative began to take effect. "I'm right here." Gradually, Hunter's massive body began to sway, his eyelids growing heavy. With gentle guidance from Ethan and the handlers, he lay down on his side, his breathing deep and regular. Even in unconsciousness, he looked powerful, 200 pounds of muscle and fur that could easily kill a man, yet had chosen instead to form a bond that defied explanation. "We've got him from here," the handler said quietly. "The sedative will last about 4 hours, more than enough time to reach the sanctuary." Ethan nodded, not trusting himself to speak as he watched them load Hunter's unconscious form onto a reinforced stretcher and into the transport. Only when the doors closed, sealing Hunter inside, did Ethan finally straighten up, feeling oddly empty. "You did the right thing," Sarah said, appearing at his side and placing a hand on his arm. "He'll be safe there." "Will I be allowed to visit him?" Ethan asked, directing the question to Rebecca. She hesitated. "That's complicated. The sanctuary has strict protocols, and there are still legal issues to address regarding your keeping a wild animal without permits." The reality of his situation began to sink in. Hunter was gone, taken to a place where experts would care for him, but where the bond they'd formed over 3 years might be severed forever. And Ethan himself faced potential criminal charges, fines, perhaps even jail time. "Let's get back to the cabin," Rebecca suggested gently. "We need to discuss next steps." The walk back was silent and heavy with unspoken emotions. By the time they reached Ethan's property, dark clouds had gathered overhead, and a light snow had begun to fall, covering their tracks as if erasing the evidence of the morning's events. Sheriff Winters was waiting for them, his patrol SUV parked in Ethan's driveway. His weathered face was grave as they approached. "Got some reports of gunfire and a disturbance," he said by way of greeting. "And Tyler Morrison's in town telling anyone who'll listen about a pet bear and a government cover-up." "It's not quite that dramatic." "Doug?" Rebecca replied, flashing her credentials. "We've been relocating a black bear that had become habituated to human contact. Standard Fish and Wildlife procedure." The sheriff's eyes shifted to Ethan. "That the whole story, Calloway?" Before Ethan could respond, a distant rumble broke the tension. Not thunder, but the sound of an engine laboring up the mountain road. Moments later, a battered pickup appeared, driving too fast for the snowy conditions. It skidded to a halt beside the sheriff's vehicle, and Tyler Morrison jumped out, his face flushed with either cold or anger. "There he is," Tyler shouted, pointing accusingly at Ethan. "The man who's been harboring a killer bear right under our noses, Sheriff. I want him arrested." Sheriff Winters held up a calming hand. "Now, Tyler, let's not—" "No, I won't calm down," Tyler interrupted, his voice carrying across the clearing. "That bear nearly killed us today, and he's been keeping it here for years, right next to where our kids hike and camp." "No one was in danger," Ethan said evenly, though his hands had curled into fists at his sides. "Hunter never left my property unattended." "Hunter," Tyler sneered. "You named it like it's a pet dog instead of a wild animal that could rip a man's throat out." Sheriff Winters stepped between them. "That's enough. Tyler, this is now a Fish and Wildlife matter, and Dr. Thornton here has the situation under control." "Under control?" "That thing should be put down, not relocated where it can escape and hurt someone else." As the argument escalated, Sarah moved closer to Ethan. "Don't engage," she murmured. "He's trying to provoke you." Ethan nodded stiffly, though every instinct urged him to defend Hunter against Tyler's accusations. The bear had never shown aggression toward humans, in fact, demonstrated more gentleness and loyalty than most people Ethan had known. A sudden gust of wind swirled snow around them, and with it came the distinct smell of smoke. Ethan frowned, scanning the tree line. A thin plume was rising from the direction of his cabin, barely visible against the darkening sky. "Fire," he said, the word cutting through the argument. "Something's burning." They all turned toward the cabin. Flames were now visible, licking at the underside of the porch where dry firewood was stacked. The fire was spreading rapidly, crawling up the wooden support beams toward the main structure. "Jesus," the sheriff muttered, already reaching for his radio. "How the hell did that start?" Ethan didn't wait for an answer. He sprinted toward the cabin, acutely aware that everything he owned photos of Sarah and James. His military mementos, the records of his life with Hunter, was inside. Behind him, he heard Sarah call his name, her voice tight with alarm. The heat hit him like a wall as he reached the porch. The fire had moved with unnatural speed, already consuming the front of the cabin. Black smoke billowed from the windows, and through the glass, Ethan could see flames dancing across his living room floor. Sheriff Winters caught up to him, grabbing his arm. "Calloway, don't, it's too dangerous." "My things," Ethan protested, trying to pull away. "Everything I have isn't worth your life," the sheriff finished firmly. "The fire department is on their way, but we're 30 minutes from town. This whole place could go up before they get here." Rebecca joined them, her face pale with shock. How could this have happened so quickly? A horrible suspicion formed in Ethan's mind. He turned toward Tyler, who stood by his truck, watching the flames, with an expression that might have been satisfaction. "Did you do this?" Ethan demanded, taking a step toward him. Tyler's face registered alarm, then defiance. "Why would I set a fire? I was with you all morning." "Not all of you," Sarah said suddenly. "Jim Branson and that other hunter disappeared after you left the ridge. They could have circled back." Before Tyler could respond, a loud crack split the air as part of the cabin's roof collapsed inward, sending a shower of sparks spiraling into the sky. The fire had breached the main structure, consuming the dry timber with voracious appetite. Ethan watched in stunned silence as his home, the fortress he'd built against the world, surrendered to the flames. All the carefully constructed barriers between himself and his pain, physical and emotional, were being reduced to ash before his eyes. "I'm sorry, Ethan," Sarah said softly, coming to stand beside him. "I'm so sorry." The snow fell harder now, hissing as it met the rising heat of the fire. Ethan felt strangely numb, as if he were watching someone else's life unravel. First Hunter, now his home, the two pillars that had supported him through the darkest years of his life, gone in a single day. The following days passed in a blur of statements and paperwork. Ethan stayed at Sarah's small house on the outskirts of Blackridge, sleeping on a pull-out couch and waking each morning with the momentary confusion of displacement before reality crashed back. Hunter was gone, his home destroyed, his future uncertain. Fire investigators determined that the blaze had been deliberately set. Accelerant was found on the cabin's porch, and boot prints in the snow matched a pattern consistent with hunting boots. Jim Branson was brought in for questioning, but released for lack of concrete evidence linking him to the arson. Tyler Morrison maintained his innocence, though few in town believed him. The division in Blackridge grew sharper, those who saw Ethan as a reckless menace who had endangered the community, and those who viewed him as a victim of Tyler's vigilante justice. On the third day after the fire, Rebecca arrived at Sarah's house with news from the sanctuary. "Hunter's not adjusting well," she said, her professional demeanor slipping to reveal genuine concern. "He's refusing food, pacing constantly, showing signs of extreme distress." Ethan felt a painful tightening in his chest. "He's looking for me." Rebecca nodded reluctantly. The sanctuary staff have never seen behavior quite like it. Most rehabilitated bears eventually adapt to their new environment, especially with proper enrichment. But Hunter... She hesitated. "He sits by the gate for hours, watching the access road. The lead keeper says it's like he's waiting for someone." "I need to see him," Ethan said immediately. "That's actually why I'm here," Rebecca replied. "The sanctuary director has agreed to allow a supervised visit. They're hoping your presence might help Hunter transition. It's highly unusual. But then, everything about this situation is unprecedented." The following morning, Ethan found himself in Rebecca's SUV, driving the 3 hours to the wildlife sanctuary located in a remote valley west of Missoula. The facility was larger than he'd imagined, dozens of acres of natural habitat enclosed by high fences, with specialized areas for different species of injured or rehabilitated wildlife. The director, a lean man named Dr. Peterson with sun-weathered skin and keen eyes, met them at the entrance. "Dr. Thornton has explained the unique circumstances of this case," he said, shaking Ethan's hand. "I must admit, I was skeptical until I observed the bear myself. His behavior is remarkably socialized. His name is Hunter, Ethan said quietly. Doctor, Peterson nodded, acknowledging the correction. Hunter. Then, he's in our largest bear enclosure, 2 acres of forest and stream habitat. But he's been showing concerning behavior since arrival. Refusal to enter the den area, minimal interest in food, vocalizations our staff describe as distress calls. They walked through the sanctuary, passing enclosures housing everything from injured eagles to orphaned wolf pups. Finally, they reached a large, fenced area with a viewing platform that allowed them to observe without being immediately visible to the animals within. He's been spending most of his time near that fallen log, Dr. Peterson said, pointing to a clearing visible through the trees. One of our keepers will accompany you into the enclosure. We normally never allow visitors this close to our bears, but given the circumstances, Ethan barely heard him, his attention fixed on the massive black shape lying beside the log. Even from this distance, Hunter looked different, his powerful body tense rather than relaxed, his head raised as if constantly alert for danger or opportunity. This wasn't the contented animal who had lounged on Ethan's porch. This was a creature in distress. A keeper named Maya joined them, carrying a tranquilizer gun as a precaution. Remember, no sudden movements, she cautioned as they entered through a double-gated security system. Even socialized bears can be unpredictable when stressed. The moment they stepped into the enclosure, Hunter's head snapped up, his nostrils flaring as he caught their scent. For a breathless second, he remained frozen, as if processing the impossible. Then, with a sound that was half roar, half whimper, he charged toward them. Maya raised the tranquilizer gun, but Ethan gently pushed it down. "Wait," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "He won't hurt me." Hunter skidded to a halt a few feet away, rising onto his hind legs to his full 7-foot height. In this posture, he was terrifying, 200 pounds of muscle and claw, capable of killing with a single swipe. The keeper tensed, her finger hovering near the trigger of the tranquilizer gun. But Ethan saw only the gentle creature who had shared his home for 3 years. "Hey, buddy," he said softly, holding out his hand. "I've missed you too." Hunter dropped to all fours and approached slowly, as if afraid Ethan might disappear. When they were just inches apart, the bear pressed his massive head against Ethan's chest, the familiar gesture of affection that had always made Ethan's heart swell. "Remarkable," Dr. Peterson murmured from the safety of the viewing platform. "I've worked with bears for 20 years and never seen anything like this." For nearly an hour, Ethan sat with Hunter in the clearing, stroking his fur and talking to him in low, soothing tones. The bear's entire demeanor transformed the tension melting from his body, his eyes losing the wild look of distress. He even accepted food from Maya, something he had refused to do since arriving at the sanctuary. "The bond between them is extraordinary," Rebecca observed, watching from a safe distance. "It defies everything we understand about wild animal behavior." As the visit drew to a close, the reality of separation began to settle over Ethan again. He would have to leave, and Hunter would remain here safe but confined, separated from the only family he had known. "I'll come back," Ethan promised, his voice breaking as Maya signaled that it was time to go. "As often as they'll let me." Hunter seemed to sense what was happening. As Ethan stood to leave, the bear rose up on his hind legs again, not in aggression but in what almost looked like an attempt to embrace him. The gesture was so human, so full of conscious emotion, that even Maya seemed moved by it. "I've never seen anything like it," she admitted as they made their way back to the entrance gate. "It's almost as if he understands." That night, as they drove back to Black Ridge, Rebecca was unusually quiet. Finally, as they neared the town limits, she spoke. "I've been thinking about Hunter's situation. And yours." "And," Ethan prompted when she didn't continue. "And I think we need to consider options beyond standard protocol. Hunter clearly isn't a typical rehabilitation case. His attachment to you isn't something we can just ignore or expect him to overcome." For the first time since the fire, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. "What are you suggesting?" Rebecca took a deep breath. "I'm suggesting we make a case for an unprecedented arrangement. One that acknowledges both the legal issues of keeping a wild animal and the unique bond you've formed." The sanctuary director seemed impressed today, Ethan said cautiously. "More than impressed. He's intrigued from a scientific perspective. The kind of socialization Hunter displays contradicts much of what we thought we knew about bear behavior. There might be research value in studying your relationship further." As they pulled into Sarah's driveway, Rebecca turned to face him directly. "I can't make any promises, Ethan, but I think there might be a way forward that works for everyone, including Hunter." 1 year later, Ethan Calloway stood at the edge of a fenced enclosure, watching as Hunter splashed playfully in a shallow pond. The bear had filled out to his full adult size, just over 200 pounds of muscle and glossy black fur. From this distance, he looked like any other American black bear, powerful and wild. But when he caught sight of Ethan, the transformation was immediate and undeniable. His posture relaxed. His movements became almost dog-like in their exuberance, and he loped over to the fence with what could only be described as joy. "Morning, big guy," Ethan said, reaching through the specially designed feeding window to scratch behind Hunter's ears. "Ready for our walk?" The path that had led them here had been neither straight nor easy. After the fire, Ethan had faced multiple charges related to the illegal possession of wildlife. The case had drawn national attention, with wildlife advocates and legal experts weighing in from across the country. Some called for strict punishment to deter others from keeping wild animals. Others pointed to the remarkable bond between man and bear as evidence that traditional approaches might not apply. In the end, it was Rebecca who had crafted the solution, a unique partnership between Ethan, the wildlife sanctuary, and the university's biology department. Hunter would remain legally classified as wildlife, housed in a specialized habitat at the sanctuary. But Ethan would be employed as a full-time interspecies behavioral specialist, working not only with Hunter, but with other animals that had developed unusual levels of socialization with humans. The arrangement satisfied the legal requirements while acknowledging the reality of Hunter's bond with Ethan. It also created opportunities for groundbreaking research on animal cognition and interspecies relationships. Dr. Peterson had secured significant funding to study Hunter's unique socialization, with Ethan as a key participant in the research. Maya approached, carrying the special harness they used for Hunter's daily walks. "He's been waiting by the gate since sunrise," she reported with a smile. "I swear he knows when it's your day to visit." "Every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday," Ethan confirmed, taking the harness. "He's got a better calendar than I do." Together, they entered the enclosure through the double gate system. Hunter greeted Ethan with his signature move, rising briefly on his hind legs before dropping down to press his massive head against Ethan's chest. No matter how many times he witnessed it, Dr. Peterson still marveled at the bear's gentle precision, how he modulated his enormous strength when interacting with humans. Their routine had become the highlight of Ethan's week, walking the sanctuary's private trails, working on enrichment activities, and simply spending time together in the spacious habitat designed to accommodate both Hunter's natural behaviors and his unusual socialization. The arrangement wasn't perfect. Ethan still wished Hunter could live with him, but it was a compromise that worked for everyone, especially Hunter. As they set out on their walk, Ethan reflected on how much his life had changed in the past year. After the fire, he had expected to retreat further into isolation, perhaps leave Montana altogether. Instead, he had found himself at the center of a community that had formed, somewhat improbably, around Hunter's story. Sarah had become more than a friend, their relationship deepening during the months of legal battles and sanctuary negotiations. Rebecca had transformed from a potential adversary into a staunch ally, her expertise and advocacy crucial to creating Hunter's unique status. Even Sheriff Winters had supported Ethan during the investigation into the cabin fire, eventually gathering enough evidence to charge Jim Branson with arson. Most surprisingly, the fire that had destroyed Ethan's isolated cabin had forced him to rebuild not just a home, but a life. The small house he now occupied on sanctuary property was modest, but comfortable, and for the first time since Afghanistan, he felt part of something larger than his own pain. "Look at him go." Maya laughed as Hunter bounded ahead on the trail, pausing occasionally to glance back and make sure they were following. "Hard to believe he's the same bear who wouldn't eat when he first arrived." "He just needed to know he wasn't alone," Ethan replied, watching as Hunter investigated a fallen log with typical ursine curiosity. That had been true for both of them. Ethan realized the tiny puppy he'd rescued from under a fallen tree had saved him just as surely as he had saved Hunter. Their unlikely bond had pulled Ethan back from the edge of despair, forcing him to reconnect with the world when all he had wanted was to disappear from it. As if sensing Ethan's thoughts, Hunter circled back, pressing against his leg in a gesture of affection that still drew gasps from sanctuary visitors when they witnessed it. Ethan reached down, burying his fingers in the thick fur at Hunter's scruff. "We made it, buddy," he said softly. "We're going to be okay." And for the first time in many years, Ethan Calloway believed it was true. Sometimes life's greatest healers come in the most unexpected packages. When Ethan Calloway, a broken veteran who had lost everything, rescued what he thought was a puppy, he had no idea he was saving a bear cub, or that this creature would ultimately save him in return. Their extraordinary journey reminds us that connection transcends boundaries we once thought impenetrable. Many of us know what it means to face loss, to build walls around our hearts, to retreat from a world that seems too painful to bear. We understand the emptiness of a quiet house, the weight of memories, the struggle to find purpose when everything familiar has slipped away. But Ethan and Hunter's story shows us that healing often arrives unexpectedly, that family can be found in the most unusual places, and that it's never too late to open our hearts again. Their bond-defying nature, science, and law speaks to something profound about love's persistence even in our darkest moments. When we dare to care for another being, we often discover we're really saving ourselves. In our golden years, this message resonates deeply the courage to connect, despite risk and heartbreak, remains our most powerful path to healing.